Mr. Don Morell of Muskegon, Michigan. Do you live in Muskegon, by the way, or somewhere else?
Right now, since I retired, I moved just outside of Muskegon County into Ottawa County, so I have a Fruitport address.
So officially Fruitport, Michigan.
I'm officially Fruitport, but I was raised and lived in Muskegon until I retired.
All right. Now, were you born in Muskegon or somewhere else?
No, I was born in Ludington. My family come to Muskegon for a few years and moved away to Hart, and then we came back in 1935. I was 9 years old, and that's been my residence ever since.
Okay. Now, what did your father do for a living?
My father, well, he worked in the factory up until during World War II, and then he went to work for the government on Forest Homes project as maintenance until he passed away.
All right. Now, then when were you born?
1926.
Okay. And then, did you finish high school?
No, I actually, when my class graduated, I was on Midway Island refitting a submarine.
All right. Now, did you volunteer for the service?
Oh yes, I was only 17 when I went in.
Did you need your parents' permission to enlist?
Oh yes, they had a sign.
Okay. Let's back up a little bit. Do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I remember that day very well. I could tell a little bit. It was, my mother and my sister and brother and I, we went to, after lunch, we went back to church because my mother was putting on the Christmas program, and us kids were all in it. And but my dad had nothing to do with the program, so he stayed home. When we come driving in the yard that afternoon, he come running up to the car telling us about Pearl Harbor.
All right. Now, at that point, had you ever heard of Pearl Harbor before?
Yes, when I was in grade school, we had a paper, I think they may still do, called the Weekly Reader. They come out with all the news in, and they had a big article about Pearl Harbor and how it was named and how it was now a major naval base. And so I pretty well knew what Pearl Harbor.
All right, so you were at least one step ahead on that level. Now, so you were not yet, so you're still too young, obviously, for the service at that point, that
I
kind
was
of thing.
15 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Right, and then at that point, were you then expecting that you'd be in the service, or do you think the war was going to end before that?
Oh no, everybody said we could lick that little island like Japan before breakfast. I mean, that was a joke. I mean, how could they cause us any problems until Pearl Harbor, and then of course we found different. But I don't think anybody believed the war would last that long as it did.
Now, as you were then going through the next couple of years of school before you enlisted, because when exactly did you enlist?
I enlisted in January of 1944.
Okay, so there's a couple full years there of America at war first. Were you paying attention to what was happening? Were you reading the newspapers, listening to radio, that kind of thing?
Oh yes, we would be glued to the radio. It was about the Philippines and Corregidor and the Death March, and all of that, and then the war. And actually, we weren't fighting much in Europe because our first invasions were in Africa. Our troops were fighting in Africa, and the bombing of Europe from England. But yeah, and then of course when you went to the movies, then they had the newsreel on before the movie, the latest news. So we seen a lot of it then.
Right. Okay, so now as you were getting older and getting closer to the point where you'd be old enough to enlist, were you looking forward to the prospect of getting into it, or did you just think, well, it was sort of your duty to do that?
Well, both. A couple of real close friends of mine that were about a year or so older enlisted in the Navy, and from the time I was 16, my thoughts was, if I go, I'm going in the Navy. That's the only, my only thoughts was going in the Navy. For some reason, I didn't want any part of the Army or
Mhm.
that. To me, it was the Navy.
Now, living kind of along or near the lake shore and so forth, did you ever go out onto Lake Michigan on boats, that kind of thing?
We went on a couple of, no, that was after the war.
Mhm.
No, I don't believe I was ever on Lake Michigan.
Mhm.
To my memory, maybe I was, but I don't remember ever being out on Lake Michigan in a boat. I know we used to go out on the pier and fish for perch all
Right.
the time.
But it wasn't like you were someone who'd been sailing since you were a kid or that
No,
kind of thing?
no.
You
My
just-
family was never had a boat, and I never did any of that.
Right.
Before.
Now, how did your parents accept your desire to enlist?
Well, I left school before my senior year, and then I worked for till January. My birthday is in June,
Mm-hmm.
and I bugged them from June until January. And finally, they said after Christmas
Mm-hmm.
they would sign. I told them I was going to be drafted anyway, and I remember when my father signed the papers. He says, "I feel like I'm signing your death warrant."
Mm-hmm. All right, so then you signed up, then where did you go first?
Well, I went to Great Lakes Naval Training to boot camp.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably about 6 weeks in those days. And,
Right. What sort of training did they actually give you there?
just basic boot training. And I went when I went back after they sent me home for a few days, about a week's
Mhm.
leave. Then I went back, and I was shipped out to California, where I was there. My pay record seemed to get messed up,
Mm-hmm.
and I was there about a month longer than normal. And then from there, I went to Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Now, what were you doing in California?
Just waiting to go overseas.
So you basically just had a very short training period at Great Lakes.
That's all
and,
I had.
And then after that, they were shipping you out. So you said, well, that was just sort of basic training. I mean, what does that mean for people who really don't know what that would be?
Well, at Great Lakes in boot camp, you were just taught Navy rules more or less,
Mhm.
given your shots, and you had all your exercises to do. We did have. It was very brief. One
Mhm.
day, half a day on the rifle range.
Mhm.
One day up in the loft, them showing you how to tie knots, and then a gas mask grill. It was basically just getting your shots and teaching you what military life was about.
Okay. Did they do a lot to sort of teach you to follow Navy discipline and that kind of thing, rules and regulations?
Oh yes, of course, that was one of the basic parts of it.
Yeah. Did you have any problems with that? Did you get in trouble?
Well, a little bit, but nothing very serious. It's a big, for a 17-year-old, it's a big change
Mhm.
going from at home where you can sass your parents
Mm-hmm.
to there in the Navy where it's yes sir and no sir.
But you learned that pretty quick.
Well, you had to, or else you were in trouble.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then, now, before you went out to California, did you ever taken a long trip before?
No. The furthest I've been, I went to Chicago once for a weekend with a couple of guys
Mhm.
a year before, and that's about as long. Or I went with my parents down to Indiana, but
Mhm. But you'd never done a really long train
oh
ride
no,
like that.
I'd never been very far.
Yeah. So what was the trip out like
The trip to
to California? Yeah.
Well, they put us on a troop train, which it took us about 5 days to get out there, and maybe 4 days. And it was just sitting on the train and with not much to do except we played cards or just visited until looking out the window because they never told us where we were,
Mhm.
and we looked to see the license plates to tell what state we was in.
Right. So you get out there. Now, where in California did you?
The place was called Shoemaker, and it was a base. It's not there anymore. It's very close to Pleasanton, which was not too far from Oakland.
Okay, so you're kind of in the greater San Francisco Bay Area kind of
I
thing.
was in
Yeah.
the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
Because our liberties, we could go to San Francisco. I was in San Francisco several times.
Mhm.
We would have overnight liberties where we'd leave at noon and wouldn't have to be back till the next noon.
Did they have places where you could stay in town, or did you just wander around the streets all night?
No, most of the guys, they would go out, they had overnight movies,
Mhm.
and we'd visit until 9, 10 o'clock. We'd go to a movie, and after we'd seen it once, fall asleep, and then they'd come and sleep there until they come and woke us up at 5 o'clock when they closed the movies, and then usually we just got on the train and went back to the base.
All right. Now, about how long did you say you had to stay? Around a month or so, do you think?
Yeah, I was there 4 to 6 weeks, about that.
All right. Now, when you shipped out, what did you sail on?
Well, they put us on a troop transport. Actually, I was all alone. I did not know a soul when I got on that transport
Mhm.
because the rest of the guys that went through boot camp had been gone for weeks.
Mhm.
And when I went, I was the only one they picked out of my barracks to go on that a draft going overseas. And I got on that troop transport. I did not know a soul on there.
All right. Now,
So-
what was that first sea voyage like? A trip out to
Well,
Hawaii?
it was really rough when we got going out close to California, and I never got seasick, but boy, there was a lot of them were seasick. But by the time we was out a day or two, the water was getting pretty calm, and it was a very eventful trip till we got to Pearl Harbor.
All right. Now, what time of year was it then? You had
It was
enlisted.
probably April.
Okay.
It may have been, it's either the end of April, yeah, it was, I would guess it was the middle of April.
All right. Now you get out to Pearl Harbor. What was your first impression of Hawaii when you got there?
Well, it was a very beautiful place. Even, of course, Pearl Harbor, you could see a lot of damaged ships and where the attack had taken place because it hadn't been completely cleaned up
Right.
yet. And then we got there, and we were to go to, that was just a stepping off place to go further into the Pacific.
Right.
And so what they took us, our whole group up to the Marine Air Base, Barbers Point Air Base, where they put us up, and then there was about 60, 70, I would guess. And when we got there, and the second night we was there, after we ate at night, for some reason that I've never figured out yet, they come in and called Morell and Campbell, 2 guys from there, the whole bunch, and says, "Get your sea bags, you're leaving." They took us down to the submarine base and put us on the submarine tender of the Holland, and as passengers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember they put us in a deck crew, but we were passengers, and I remember the boatswain say, "Why are we taking on passengers now? It'll be at least a month before we leave here, and we have to go and dry dock first," which we did. It was at least a month, but we knew then that we were going to Midway. So the next, we did leave for Midway, and by the way, just the day we left, Ray Anthony, the band leader, I imagine you've heard of him, him and his band, he had a Navy band, got on the tender to go out to Midway with us. Well, we got out to Midway, and we still didn't know what they were going to do with us. And we were all, the next morning, they was all out there for our muster, and they started calling off different names and assigning them, some to the base, some to the submarine crew, some to different places. And they got left in this Campbell and myself, Bob Campbell. And the 2 of us were standing there, and this one officer come up to us and said, "Would you guys like submarine service?" Yeah, might as well. It's a way to get off the island.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Midway Island is only about half a mile wide and a mile or so long. From the barracks, you can see the ocean on all four sides. But anyway, we got, and they assigned me to the submarine relief crew, and which then you was in submarine duty. The relief crews are the ones that gets on the submarine when they come in from war patrol and get it, they refit it and get it ready for the next war patrol. They got 2 weeks of doing that. Everyone in the relief crew are submarine, most of them either right out of submarine school or had been on a submarine for 4 or 5 war patrols, and they took them off to give them a rest. And then when the submarine left on the next patrol, they transferred off about a fifth of the crew, 20% of the crew, and took on the men from the relief crew. And that's what we did, and that was the 1st of June, because I know the 6th of June then was
D-Day.
D-Day in Europe, and that was my 18th birthday.
Now, did you board a submarine at Midway, or did they send you somewhere else?
No, I stayed there until the 1st of December, and then from Midway, we got on the submarine tender Proteus and went back to Pearl Harbor.
All right. Before we go on there, so basically you spent several months there on Midway Island.
From the 1st of June till the 1st of December.
What did you do all that time?
Work on the submarines that came in.
So there was a submarine base there.
No, that was a primary submarine base. They had in Midway because that was 1,000 miles closer to the coast of Japan.
Right.
And so they would go out from there. By the way, the last 2 months I was on Midway, I had about as good a duty as you could have in the Navy. I got on a fishing boat. I was still attached to the submarine, but they took several guys off from there, some off the base. There was some Marines and some Seabees, and they put us in what they call the fishing detail, and we run the fishing boats. We take out fishing parties and catch the fish turn it over to general mess. So I spent about 2 months doing nothing but deep sea fishing.
So what did you catch out there?
Mostly tuna and wahoo, and that 90% of it was that. Plus they did, I was never on the boat when they did this, it was in other boats, but they caught a few sharks, they brought them in, and then we'd catch some bonitas, and dolphins. There's several different types of dolphins. These were not the mammals. These were the
These
kind
fish,
that you could eat.
Right.
And but we did that until the 1st of December approximately, and then they put us on the Proteus, and they took us back to Pearl Harbor, where they formed a new relief crew, a new squadron. And the 30th Squadron, which they put us in, and probably around the 1st of February, they sent us to Brisbane, Australia, on the Gilmore, another tender, the Gilmore. I know we crossed the equator on the 14th of February.
All right.
But we got into Brisbane, was there a day or two, and they put us on a train to Perth, which is across country, and that was a real experience.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, in Australia, you don't go from one state to another on the same train because every state had different gauge tracks at that time. And now we were the whole squadron. We had 2 boxcars loaded with office records and desks, all office material and everything. So when we got to one state, we would get off, and then we would have to take all the material, those 2 boxcars, and move them to another 2 boxcars. And so we were in there several hours, and then we go on to another state, and the same thing. And we went from Brisbane down the coast right down nenext to the coast
Go to
to
like
Adelaide.
Sydney, yeah. So Sydney, did you go to Sydney and Melbourne and
Yeah,
then
we
over to
hit
Adelaide?
Sydney, Melbourne, and all the way down, and then what is it down there? Melbourne, I guess, the furthest south.
Yeah.
And then we started up north again until we got up by the a ways, and then straight across the desert
Mm-hmm.
And when we got on the desert, that was an experience too. I mean, every time they had a meal, the train would stop.
Mm-hmm.
They would set tables up alongside the train, and
Mhm.
we would get on. It took us 10 days to get across there.
Wow.
And we weren't riding in Pullmans or anything like
Mhm.
that. We were riding. Sometimes we could sleep in our seats, and sometimes there was like a cattle car. We had to
Mhm.
sleep just on the floor. It wasn't very comfortable, and they fed us mutton 3 times a day.
Mhm.
We had probably mutton sausage for breakfast, mutton stew for lunch, and then roast mutton at night. And it was fat, greasy mutton, and a lot of the guys were sick, but we got into Perth, and then when we got there, the submarine base was at Fremantle, which is just a 15, 20-minute train ride from Perth.
Okay.
And we got in Fremantle, and they put us up in a barracks, and we started refitting the submarines from there until our tender come in. And most relief crews are on a tender.
Mhm.
So they moved us on the tender, and we was on the tender a short time, and the Chubb came in from its second war, finishing its first war patrol. We refitted on that,
Mhm.
and then my name come up to go out on the Chubb.
Okay. Now, up to this point, you've been in really kind of non-combat duty, away
Yeah.
from most of the dangerous stuff,
Yeah, yes.
and so forth. What had you learned over the course of that time about the submarine service and what had happened or how dangerous it was?
Well, quite a bit, because every time one of the boats was missing, well, of course, we would hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the submarine service, when you went out on a submarine, 1 out of 5 never returned.
Mm-hmm.
There was 18,000 approximately in the submarine service that made war patrols, and 3,600 never returned, which was about 22%. That's the highest mortality rate of any branch of the service.
Right.
But when you're 17, 18 years old,
Mhm.
you just, it will never happen to you.
Right.
You know.
Now, by the time you actually go on to the Chubb, it's fairly late in the war. We're clearly winning it, and they're kind of advancing toward
Yes.
Japan. There's fewer threats. Did you have the impression that the submarine service was getting at least a little bit less dangerous or less likely to get sunk? Or
Well, I was, I went to, before I went to high school, I went to Orchard View School, and one of my classmates there, a very good friend of mine, I got a letter from my mother after we left Orchard View School, and he never went to high school,
Mhm.
and I'd never seen much of him,
Mhm.
but after I got a letter from my mother that he was missing on the Bonefish,
Mhm.
the second to the last submarine that was sank.
Mhm.
And that really hit me hard, because I knew him so well.
Mhm.
I knew other guys from the relief crew that had gone down on boats, but this guy, I knew his
Mhm.
whole family,
Yep.
and I'd been in his home, and he'd been in my home. We were just very close, and that hit me hard.
Mhm.
And when Chuck, his name was Chuck Renor, his dad had a barber shop on Western Avenue, when down next to, not the Goodwill, but that other rescue mission,
Mhm.
right beside the rescue mission on Western Avenue back before the war.
All right. So, what were you thinking about or expecting or whatever when you kind of go out on your first patrol then?
Well, I was very eager to go out on my first patrol. We went out, and the Chubb had never sank any ships on its first patrol, but it did pick up 3 flyers
Mm-hmm.
that were shot down. But the night that we sank our first ship, most of the guys there had been their first experience of sinking a ship, and it was a destroyer escort that we sank.
Now, was that a ship that was trying to sink you, or did you manage to surprise it?
Yeah, I say that was the first one we sank. The night before, we had damaged a freighter so bad, a small freighter, but it was with our deck gun, but it was in such shallow water that it really didn't sink.
Yeah, it just ran aground.
It just ran aground, and they sent that destroyer out looking for us, and we sank that.
All right. Now, at this point, did the Japanese, did they, as destroyer hunters, did they have advantages over you? Was it more dangerous for you or for them at this point?
Well, it was more dangerous for them because we right then and there were pretty well controlling their shipping lanes. We were operating in just north of Lombok Straits, off from Borneo and Sumatra, and there in what they call the East Indies, and it was pretty well. We pretty well had the distinct advantage, although the last submarine that was sunk was the Bullhead, and that was we were operating with the Bullhead when it went the day before it went down, and it was sunk by aerial bombs. About a week before the war was over.
Now, the crew that you were joining, most of them just made that one patrol. Did you have some who were more experienced veterans, or?
Oh yes, when they put a new submarine in commission, they will take probably at least half of the crew will be very experienced, maybe more than half, that had made other war patrols. Some of them made 8-10 war patrols by that time. Some of them maybe only a few, and they went back for new construction, and then they would take the rest out of submarine school.
All right. Now, what were your specific duties on board the Chubb?
Well, I made 2 war patrols. On the first war patrol, I was the lookout. And the lookouts, we had an hour on lookouts, and then on the bridge, and then an hour off. So on our hour off, we would go down and on the helm, or on sonar. The lookouts rotated with sonar and helm, and then. When we were submerged, of course, there would be no lookouts, so the lookouts would man the bow and stern planes.
Okay, and what would your responsibility be there?
Well, the submarine, when they submerge, they try to get a very equal buoyancy, where it won't go up or down, and just stay there, and if they get enough the right water in all the forward tanks and back, it will sit there, just sit there. And under movement, the bow planes and the stern planes are just like an airplane. They use a rudder, you go up and down. The diving off, say 10 degrees down bubble, you turn 10 degrees, turn to 10 degrees, and then the guy in the stern plane operates it. Well, the guy in the bow plane just gives the down level, but the guy on the stern planes will keep the 10 degrees down.
Now, had you been sort of trained to do this already while you were doing relief patrols, or did you have to learn that once you finally sailed?
I learned that after I got on the boat. I was trained for other things. I learned very much about the submarine on a relief crew, but those are the things that you actually have to operate in order to. But it's not that difficult to operate.
Yep.
And then on the second patrol, I was in the auxiliary crew, so I would work on. I was on the air manifold, and my job was that when we surfaced, the diving officer, of course, would give me my instruction, but I would blow the tanks, put, with compressed air, I turned the valves to blow the tank to surface, and the main balance. And then we had the safety and negative tanks, and they would tell me which ones to blow, and I would turn the lever to blow it. When we submerged, then to get that the right proper buoyancy, we might pump water from forward to aft if there was a little heavy at one end, but we'd pump water back and forth to make it easy for the guys on the bow and stern plane.
Okay. Now, on these 2 war patrols that you took, you said you damaged one ship that kind of had to run aground, then you sank a destroyer escort. When you sank something, that was with torpedoes, the second one then?
Yeah, so the Chubb was credited with sinking 9 ships in that 2 war patrols, and I think 3 of them with torpedoes. The rest were pretty small, and we sank them with our deck guns.
Deck guns. All right. Now, when you sank something, did you make any provisions to try to help the crew of the ship, or call in somebody else, or was that not your job?
That was not our job. If you go down on the silver side down here, if you've probably been, you can imagine 90 men living on that. Where are you going to take the crew? We did pick up one guy that was swimming towards the boat and picked him up to see if we could get any information from him, but we couldn't because he was Japanese. He wasn't Japanese, he was Javanese or something, and nobody on the boat could communicate with him by language. But
so he was probably just somebody who was either just a hired hand or someone who had been impressed by the Japanese.
I don't think he was even a member of the Japanese Navy. He was a civilian on one of the boats that they just took on and made him work on the boat that we sank, the ship we sank.
Okay. Now, were there situations where your own boat was actually under attack or in any amount of danger? I mean, there was the first boat that came looking for you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, after every sinking, especially when we submerged, you could figure that you was in for a depth charge attack. We had 3 or 4 depth charge attacks where some of them got pretty close, but when I hear about some of the stories of the other guys, we didn't go through what they did. Our worst experience, and this happened on the 7th of August, just a week before the war was over. We were caught on the surface, and radar didn't pick it up, and the lookouts didn't pick it up, but a float plane come over and dropped 2 bombs before they was even knew he was there, and they were very, very close. But they.
Now, were aircraft more of a danger at that point than surface ships or sub-hunters?
A lot of the boats were sunk by aircraft, so I would say they're probably equal. You see, at that time we had to go in shallow water to get the Japanese shipping because their large freighters had all been sunk, and they were using smaller freighters, sticking closer to shore, and we, from island to island. And so there was all kinds of islands where we were operating.
And if a fair amount of the time the weather was relatively clear and so forth, and the water is pretty clear, aircraft could probably spot you fairly easily.
Yeah, you got to be down. Oh gosh, I think you would have to be down well over 100 feet before they could not spot you. Depending on how rough the water is.
Now, do you know if the Japanese had any kind of radar on those planes, or?
I don't think the Japanese had radar during World War II.
Maybe not. They had on their ships eventually, but not the aircraft, maybe.
Yeah.
Because in the Atlantic, the Allies used radar to spot.
But that was the big advantage that we had over them. Of course, the radar we had in those days, I don't think it had a 50-mile range, maybe 20, 30-mile range, because you could see mountains. When I was on lookout, I could see mountains. And then when I went down in the conning tower, I go down, and they didn't even see the mountains. They were too far away.
Right. Now, How did you adjust to just life on a submarine, especially when, did you spend much time submerged, or were you usually on the surface?
Well, you see, every submarine was assigned a station
Mm-hmm.
in an area of the Pacific. It was in the Japanese shipping lane. And of course, we would try to stay on the surface until we got to our, unless we were forced down by a plane or something. But we'd stay on the surface till we got to our station. And when we got on our station, we would, it was common practice to spend daylight submerged in darkness on the surface, charging our batteries, and we were operating so close to the equator that we had just about 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. So we spent half the time submerged, half the time on the surface.
And how well did you deal with being submerged? I mean, when you're kind of down there in that small space with all those guys.
To me, I could see, I'll be honest with you, when I would go to bed and they would sign the diving alarm, I would sleep right through it. When we surfaced, I'd sleep right through it. And when I would wake up, I would listen. If I could hear the diesels, I would know that we were on the surface. If I couldn't. Now the battle station's alarm, I would wake up on about the second gong. I mean, I would wake up right away when it came to battle station, but your body just, you know, the diving alarm is no emergency.
So you kind of adapted fairly well to that situation.
Yes, I guess we did. It just became a way of life. I mean, you was on the surface, you was submerged, and you was hoping they'd get a contact and have battle stations because to relieve the boredom.
It would give you something to do. Yeah. What kinds of things do people do to cope with the boredom? How could you keep yourself entertained?
Well, if there was nothing going on, they let us show movies in the mess hall every afternoon. And they sat around and talked. Some of them played cards. Some of the guys read, you know, but you would pretty well read everything. We had a phonograph aboard. We'd have these electrical recordings, they would call them in those days, which would be recordings of radio shows, and especially the musical ones like Bing Crosby and Johnny Mercer shows, and that, and some of the comedies, you know, Bob Hope or Jack Benny shows. We'd have those, we'd listen to them over and over, and we'd show the movies over and over, and we just, a lot of guys slept. You see, we had, the crew was divided into 3 sections, and one section would be on watch at all time. So you would have either the 4 to 8 or the 8 to 12 or 12 to 4 watch. So you would have 4 on and 8 off. And then on your 8 off, you had very little to do most of the time, so you could, most of the guys would get 12 hours sleep a day. So, I mean, and then you was only had 4 hours that you didn't, wasn't on watch or wasn't sleeping, so it wasn't that bad. They served 2 big meals a day, 8 in the morning and 8 at night. That they would start serving the guys first that had to go on watch at 8, and the guys coming off watch, then they would eat, and the guys in between would just fill in when there was a place open. They would have, now there was not enough bunks for everybody, so we did what they call hot sack. They would assign 3 men to 2 bunks. But they would all be from different sections. Right. So one man would be on watch at all time, so you always had a bunk to sleep in. If you got out of this bunk to go on watch, and then the guy that was relieving you might be on this bunk, so you come back to this bunk, the bunk would still be warm, and that's what they called it, hot sack.
All right. Now, while you were out on patrol, did you have much of an idea of what else was going on in the outside world?
Every night when we surfaced, we would get, they'd turn on the radio. You couldn't operate our radios, of course, submerged. And they would turn on the news, and they would pass along what was going on, and you know, in Europe and then the Pacific.
Would you listen to Tokyo Rose, or did they not switch?
I never listened to it on when I was on the submarine, but when I was on Midway, which is fairly not too far from Japan, we listened to Tokyo Rose almost every night.
And why would you listen to her?
She played excellent music. I mean, she played the kind of music we wanted to listen to, and we listened to her propaganda and everything. We couldn't tell right home and say we was on Midway, but she knew they would talk about the 6th Squadron. I was in the 6th Squadron then on Midway, and they knew every submarine that came in and out of Midway and everything else. But we couldn't write home and say that.
Right.
But she knew everything. In fact, when we left on the Proteus, she says, "Are you guys leaving on the Proteus?" She says, "You better write to your sweethearts and mothers, because," she says, "this is the last letter you ever write. The Proteus will never leave the side of Midway." And when we left Midway, we had 5 destroyers escorting us to Pearl Harbor. And the first night, they probably picked up something, because several miles away we could hear the sirens go off and them dropping depth charges. But we had nothing that affected us, but they were out there someplace, I would assume.
Now, did you find that kind of propaganda message, did that worry you at all, or did you just kind of laugh it off?
Not really. We kind of joked about it and everything. But like I say, it's a lot different when you're 18 than it is when you're 80.
Yeah. All right. Now, did you wind up making friends with the people on the crew? Was there a group of people that you sort of spent a lot of time with?
Oh yeah, we had certain friends. Some of us become pretty good friends, and when we was in port and after every war patrol, the first thing they did was take his crew off and put them up in a rest camp for 2 weeks R&R. If you was lucky enough to be in Hawaii, you got 2 weeks of the Royal Hawaiian. And in Australia, they had where we were, they had 2 hotels downtown Australia, which I thought was better duty in Australia. I just loved Australia. And they put us up in a hotel for 2 weeks, and you had nothing to do for 2 weeks. Then you went back on the boat.
How did the Australians treat you when you were there?
Very good. I never had a problem with any Australian while I was there.
At this stage in the war, I mean, were they basically appreciative of the Americans being there, or was it they just took it for granted you were winning?
Yes, they were. They treated us all nice. I don't know. I heard some stories. Of course, there's always some kind of story, but I would say, as a general rule, we were treated very nice by the Australians, and because the submarine service was the highest paid branch of the service, and us guys, we had quite a bit of money to spend, and that may have helped the reason they treated us. You know, we were good for their economy.
So the girls and the bartenders, anyway, might have liked you.
Yeah.
Don't know about the men, but.
And they had the Red Cross had a place down by the river there. There was a small lake there in Perth, and we could get chocolate sundaes there. And that's something the girls you couldn't buy in town. The only place you could get them there, and if you ask a girl if they wanted to go down, they called it chocolate ice cream, but it was vanilla with chocolate on it. And you ask them if they wanted to go down and get some chocolate ice cream, you usually could get a date that way.
All right. Now, where were you at the point when the war ended?
We had just went through Lombok Straits, which was a very dangerous place because you could not go through submerged, and Lombok and Valley were very close together. So you went through at night at flank speed. and we had just gone through Lombok Straits, and was south of Lombok Straits when the ceasefire came on the 15th of August, and we pulled into Fremantle on the 17th. We were the first boat in Fremont, in Fremantle after the war was over. And
Was there a celebration in Fremantle, or was it just business as usual?
well, when we pulled in and tied up alongside our tender, all the guys said, "Hey, don't look for a beer because we drank it all." Yeah, what? Yeah, and no beer, and we thought they were just kidding us. But it turns out they wasn't. In Perth and all of Australia, I think, but I know in Perth, all the bars closed at 6 o'clock at night. If you after 6 o'clock, you couldn't buy a beer. Everybody drank beer because they had the best beer there ever was. It still is, I think. But anyway, we got there, and when the war was over, they never closed. They just stayed open 24 hours until they were out of beer. But 2 days later, after we got there, it wasn't over 2 days, they got a fresh supply from the breweries. It was just very temporary. But they did drink. Every bar stayed open, and after they drank the beer, they had liquor there, and they drank liquor. I understand. By the time we got there, they were closed because they had nothing to sell.
All right. Now, after you kind of recovered from all of that, did you stay on in Australia for a while, or did they ship you out pretty quickly?
No. Well, they about after we was there 2 weeks, about the time our 2 weeks R&R was over, Truman stopped Lend-Lease, and so they what they did was when he stopped Lend-Lease, well, we lost our docks there in Fremantle. So everyone had to go back to their boats. We had to go back a day early, and all the boats left for Subic Bay. But I had been overseas over 18 months, and so they said they took everyone that had been overseas over 18 months and took them off and put them on back in the relief crew on the tender, because the tender was coming home to the States. So we was there probably a month or a little bit better on the tender there, not doing much. We had a lot of liberty in there, and till we left and come back to the States. Now we come down around the bottom of Australia, which is the roughest water in the world, the Australian Bight, and believe me, it is rough. I mean, you hung on all the time. You had to hang on. And we headed for the Panama Canal because we were going back to New London. And we come within sight of Pitcairn Island. I'm sure you know, everybody knows Pitcairn Island. And we circled Pitcairn Island. The captain come on and says, we can do this because we're not on a specified course. So they made a circle and explained all about Pitcairn Island for the ones that didn't know, and the Christiansons that were still living there. And we got into Panama, and we had a day there, and then we went through the canal. And the day we went through the canal was the final game of the Tiger Cubs World Series.
Oh, well.
The 7th game of the World Series. Hank Greenberg had just got out of the Army, and on the 6th game, the Tigers were ahead by 1 run, and he was playing first base, and he on the 9th inning, the ball went through his legs, and he let the winning and tying and winning run to score. But then on the 7th day, he come back and hit 2 home runs and practically won the game single-handed. That was in 1945. Baseball fans will remember that.
Yeah,
the old ones.
Yeah, but I'm from Chicago, so don't rub it in.
You know, back in those days, there was so many Cub fans around Muskegon because they couldn't get the Tiger games on radio. there was no television.
Mhm.
But, and we could get Chicago
Right.
on radio, so there was a lot of Cub fans back then.
All right. Now, once you got back to the States, they take you all the way around to New London, Connecticut?
Yeah, we went to New London, we got our 30 days leave,
Mhm.
and even though I'd been overseas so long, and they give points out on age, and and you got 10 points if you had a dependent, which I didn't have.
Mhm.
I did not have enough points to get out, so I was in the relief crew on the tender, which our job was we were decommissioning the submarines.
Mhm.
And they would put alongside the tender, and it'd take us about a week or two to get everything off radar and everything that they wanted to take off before they put them in mothballs. And that was pretty good duty. We got our submarine pay and everything, and got liberty every night, and just working about 6 hours a day. But we did that until I had enough points in May to get discharged.
Okay, so like May of 46 then?
Yeah.
You're finally done. Okay. And then at that point, did you go back home to Muskegon?
Yes, I came back to Muskegon, and I worked at a telephone company for about 4 years. And then I worked for a heating outfit for about a couple months. And the Korean War came on, and I went into the work in the factory, worked Continental, and then Seal Power. And then let me see, in mid-50s, I went back and worked. A friend of mine that I'd worked with at this other heating company started his own heating company, and I worked there with him for a few years. Then I went on and started my heating company and was self-employed until I retired.
Now, at what point did you start getting involved with veterans groups or reunions or things like that?
Well, I had joined the VFW when I first got out, but I dropped my membership. And then I never heard of the submarine veterans of World War II. And I seen an article in the paper, and I had heard a little, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. And then in 1985, submarine veterans, they had their state meeting in Grand Rapids, and Muskegon had a big write-up in the paper, and the state commander lived in, they give his name, and he lived in Ravenna. Well, at that time, I lived on the Heights, I had my business operating on the Heights Ravenna Road, halfway between Muskegon and Ravenna. So I looked in the phone book, and there he was. I called him up and told him I served in the submarine service. He said, will you join? I said, yeah. He says, I'll be over tonight. I went to tell him where I live. I go by your house, he says, every day. So he come over and he signed me up, and I've been very active ever since.
All right. And what kinds of stuff does the group do?
Well, at that time we had lobbyists in the Congress, etc., and things like that. But now, I'm one of the younger ones in there, and I'm 82. So we're more of a social club. We just get together. We have 4 meetings a year, and about 10 years ago, nobody would take the state commander's job, so I took it, and I've had it ever since. And so I more or less I got a good friend over in Warren, Michigan, that is the secretary-treasurer, and him and I, we're the ones that we set up the meetings. But we're more or less a social group. We get together. We have 2 real big meetings. One here in Muskegon over Memorial Day, where we have our meeting on Saturday before Memorial Day, and then Sunday we come here aboard the Silversides, and we have our Memorial Day service, where we have our Lost Boat ceremony, where we remember the 52 submarines and 3,600 men that went down on them. Our wives are there. We read off the boats, and we have 4 of our wives up there throwing flour in the water for every boat that went down. It's quite impressive. We tried to get a Navy Admiral here to be our keynote speaker, a submarine admiral. In fact, they just told me at our meeting up there today, they want me to get one for next Memorial Day. I got a friend over in Wisconsin, knows every admiral alive, I think. And I just call him and he gets me a speaker. But he was in the submarine service when Pearl Harbor was attacked, so he's one of the older ones.
Right.
But and then we have every submarine that went down was assigned to the state, to a state. 52, so California and New York have 2. But anyway, every state was in charge of building a memorial to that submarine. The submarine that we're Michigan got is the Escalar, and we built a memorial in Charlevoix, and it's sitting there right there in the park, right by the lake. If you've ever went through Charlevoix, right on 31, and we have our fall meeting, which will be the 3rd weekend in October. There we have our lost boat ceremony there at our memorial, and then we have our winter meeting in Birch Run, there by Frankenmuth. Our summer meetings, well, that's the one that we don't have in one place or another. We just pick a place for our summer meeting.
All right. Now, to look back on the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the submarine service wound up affecting you? Did that whole experience of being in the military and so forth make you think differently or view things differently?
Well, I wouldn't have changed what I did if I had the opportunity to get over it, because I've met so many real close friends that served on the submarines. You know, we're still call ourselves a family, because when you're on a submarine, when you go out for 6 to 8 weeks with 90 shipmates, as confined as you are on a submarine, you get to know them. And I get a newsletter 4 times a year from the guy that writes it from my boat, and we send in thing and tell them how our family's doing. And even the guys on the boat you never served with, that you see at our meetings, we just so close. We had a national convention 2 weeks ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and well, there was 18,000 that were eligible to join our organization, and over 16,000 did, but not at the same time. We had well over 8,000, and now we're down well under 4,000 now because of our age.
Right.
And we had, I think, 200 sub-vets in Louisville. We had over 400 there, but actually submarine veterans. Our wives always go with it. Our organization always includes our wives in everything. They have their own organization. Our state meetings are from, we get together Friday afternoon usually, and then Saturday at a motel where we get a hospitality room. Then Saturday we have our meetings, and Saturday night we have a banquet and a raffle, and just a lot of fun together. Sunday morning, like in Muskegon, we come here to the silver side. Normally Sunday morning we all get up and go home, but here we go to the silver side.
All right. Anything else you can think of, individual experiences or things you'd like to add to the record before we close this out?
I think we've covered just about everything.
You've done a very good job of telling us about what you did, what it was like on the submarines, and the first of what I hope will be a number of these that we'll get.
My very good friend from Warren, Michigan, he's our Secretary Treasurer. Now, his experiences, he got out of submarine school and went on the ice fish, made 5 war patrol. The ice fish was a new boat in that was being built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And he got on there at Manitowoc and spent all the time, his whole Navy career on the ice fish. In the 5 war patrols, he come back to the West Coast, I believe, or East Coast, I don't know which one, and got off, and that was it. That's it. But he has a lot of interesting stories to tell me, and he'll be here a week from today.
Very good. Well, look forward to it. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Nice meeting you guys, and I hope I it helped out.